With the new 9th edition rules granting 10 victory points to armies that are painted to a battle-ready standard, it's a good time to start adding a little colour to our Grey Hordes, and in this video I'll be showing you how to paint your Dark Angels from primer to being ready to base in less than 25 minutes. I'm starting off by assembling an Assault Intercessor here, partly because the open pose helps me to demonstrate the process more easily, but also because it justifies me having Indomitus keyword in my video. With that assembled, we can begin priming, arguably the most important step in painting your model, as it allows your subsequent layers to stick to the model surface properly. I'm using an airbrush here, but really the method of application doesn't matter, be it airbrush, aerosol or brush application. The only really important thing here is that the colour you use is black. Using this extremely dark starting colour will help us to create shadows without the need for washes later on. Now before we pick up our brush, we need to decide on the paints we'll be using. We need 3 shades of our Space Marines armour, which in our case is green. From left to right I have my base colour, Nocturne Green, my midtone, Warpstone Glow, and my highlight, Moot Green. By layering these progressively lighter colours, we can create depth and boost details, allowing us to avoid an otherwise flat and bland looking armour colour. So the main technique that will allow us to get these layers down quickly is called dry brushing. To dry brush, start by taking your paint, Nocturne Green in this case, and add a little bit of it to your palette. Then you'll need to grab yourself a large and preferably rounded brush like this one here. Dip your brush into the paint, ensuring the bristles are well coated, but before we apply this we need to remove the excess paint from the bristles whilst helping to work the paint through them. Wipe your brush onto a tissue or a piece of paper until only a small amount of paint comes off the brush. This wiping away of paint gives us the dry in dry brushing. So with our brush prepped, let's start the timer and start applying the paint to the model. I'm using quick, broad strokes here. This method will cause the paint to build up on the flat surfaces and edges, but will keep the deeper recesses as dark black, which creates the illusion of shadows. You may also notice that I'm focusing my movements from top to bottom. Light normally comes from above, so this creates lighter areas at the top of the model and darker at the bottom. Brushing in a vertical motion will help to recreate this effect. This darker Nocturne Green will not only create the colour of the shaded areas of the armour, but it will also help us to build up our lighter paints in the next few steps. So with the whole armour, with the exception of the recesses, coated in Nocturne Green, we can move onto our midtone, Warpstone Glow. I'll be using the exact same dry brushing method as before, but instead I'll be focusing the application more towards the top part of the model, again recreating the appearance of light falling on the model from above. You may find that the paint needs a couple of layers this time, partly because it's brighter, but also because with this being a layer paint, it's not quite as highly pigmented as the base colour of Nocturne Green. Now that we have a little more shading on the surfaces, we can really start to boost the brightness of the edges by using some of our highlight paint, Moot Green. I'm using a smaller brush as I only want to pick out the upper edges of the armour this time, rather than the flat panels. As such, the same dry brushing steps as before apply here, but you just want to drag the flat side of the brush across the edge to leave that thin line of lighter paint behind. Using such a lighter colour here will result in the edges and details being much more prominent than if we had skipped this step, and as such, making the miniature look much more detailed. As our model stands currently, it's not looking very much like a Dark Angel. The armour colour is too bright and it's closer in appearance to a salamander. However, this isn't a problem as we'll be applying some contrast paint over the top. By applying a good layer of this Ork Flesh over the armour, you can see that I'm using straight from the pot, we can both tone down the armour's brightness and also help to blend the layers together. As contrast paint dries, slightly translucently, it creates a coloured filter, green in this case. As a result, the layers we dry brushed on before will not only have a more unified green tone, but the transitions between them will be smoothed out, creating a gradient of shade. As you're applying this contrast paint over your armour surface, try not to allow it to pool up in any one area. Try to move it across the surface to have an even application. At this stage, our armour is complete, which means we can move on to the other details. For everything that isn't armour, I'll be applying a layer of Corvus Black. However, I would first recommend watering it down a little until you have a consistency similar to this. With this watered down mixture, you can start to paint the pouches, weapons, pipes, iconography, and the gaps between the armor. The very dark grey of Corvus Black is not quite as stark as using something like Abaddon Black, but it is still dark enough to provide contrast against the brighter green. Once your first layer is applied, you can apply another one over the top in any areas that didn't cover quite as well. With all of the details picked out in Corvus Black, the next task is to pick out the metallic areas of the model. For this, I'll be using Leadbelcher and applying it as an edge highlight. By just applying a thin line of metallic paint over the weapons, vents, and iconography, we can create the appearance of a darkened steel that is only reflecting light at its very edges. By keeping the Corvus Black base coat visible in recesses, we not only help with the shading, but we also save time by not having to apply a full base coat and then follow it up with a wash. So, as our miniature stands currently, you could easily run this in your army. It has at least 3 colours, as well as a little shading and detail work, and we're currently under 20 minutes of painting time. However, if you wanted to boost the details, then there are a few more quick steps you can perform. The first of these requires taking some of the tan colour of Morghast Bone and thinning it out a little in the same way as we did our Corvus Black earlier. This can then be used to paint any of the purity seals, the helmet lenses, and also as an edge highlight for the leather pouches. This light colour will give us a good basis for some contrast paints that we'll be applying next. First of all, Blood Angel's Red can be added to the lenses and the wax of the purity seals. Due to the way that contrast paints adds colour to surfaces and shades the recesses, it's a really quick way of adding some bright contrasting colour against our green armour. Finally, all we need to do is to give the leather areas a coat of Cygor Brown. Over the Corvus Black, this will create a very dark reddish brown, whereas the Morghast Brown highlights will still show through, giving a little subtle edge highlight to them. With all the paints completed, you just need to add a base, like this simple one here created with some textured paint, a wash and a quick dry brush. However, you will notice that the model has this glossy sheen, which is caused by the contrast paint layers. I find this negatively impacts the appearance of the paint scheme, so we need to apply a matte varnish. This will not only remove the glossiness, but will also protect the paintwork when you're using your minis in games. I'm using some of AK Interactive's Ultra Matte Varnish through my airbrush here, but there are plenty of matte varnishes available in brush and aerosol form too. Once the varnish is dried, you should be left with something that looks like this. And here we have the completed battle-ready Dark Angel. While this technique certainly won't leave you with any award-winning paint jobs, it's a fast and effective method. Being able to paint a single mini from the primer coat to the ready to base in less than 25 minutes means you can get your army completed in no time at all compared to conventional techniques. You can further reduce this time taken by painting in batches as well. By painting minis in 5 or 10 at a time, you can save time between switching paints or waiting for the layers to fully dry before you can progress to the next one. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know and leave me your suggestions for other battle-ready guides you'd like to see me try next. Also, I would be extremely grateful if you were to consider supporting me and the creation of these videos by using the affiliates links to Firestorm Games, becoming a member of my channel, or by checking out my Patreon, all of which can be found down below in the description. Be sure to check out my Discord as well, and join an excellent community of wargaming loving people, and a link to that is also in the description. So the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching, and goodbye.